everyone, and welcome back to your daily dose of what's happening on Hacker News. Yesterday was absolutely packed with fascinating discussions. We reviewed 30 stories from the front page, and I've pulled together the top 5 that really got the community fired up. We've got everything from philosophical debates about whether AI needs its own documentation standards to some genuinely concerning discoveries about what happens when you're just trying to apply for a visa online. Plus, we'll look at a beautiful visualization project that spiraled out of simple curiosity, and wrap up with the latest in the ongoing saga of developers trying to reclaim their tools from the cloud. So let's dive right in with a story that's really making waves in the AI development community. Next up, let's talk about AGENTS.md, which is this fascinating proposal for an open format specifically designed to guide AI coding agents. So imagine this. You know how every project has a README file for humans? Well, someone's proposing we need a parallel universe of documentation just for our AI coding assistants. And honestly, the Hacker News crowd is pretty divided on whether this is genius or completely unnecessary. The basic idea is actually pretty straightforward. You'd have your regular readme.md that stays exactly as it is, nice, clean, human-friendly documentation. But then, alongside it, you'd create this AGENTS.md file that's packed with all the nitty-gritty technical details that an AI coding assistant would need to actually work with your codebase effectively. We're talking build steps, testing commands, project conventions, environment setup, all that stuff that might make a README unbearably long and technical for a human who just wants to understand what your project does. What's really interesting here is that this isn't just some random person's pet project. It's already gaining traction across multiple AI coding tools. OpenAI's Codex, Google's Jules, Cursor, Factory, RuCode, they're all apparently starting to recognize and use this format. It's like watching a standard emerge in real time, which, if you've been in tech long enough, you know that can either be incredibly exciting or the beginning of yet another standards war. The community reaction on Hacker News is where things get really spicy, though. With 786 points and 372 comments, people have opinions about this. There's this fascinating philosophical divide emerging between two camps. On one side, you've got developers who are basically saying, yes, finally, this is exactly what we need. They're already creating their own agents.md files. Some are even suggesting we should go further. Instead of one big file, why not have a whole .agents folder with organized subsections for different contexts? But then you've got the skeptics, and they're raising some really valid points. One commenter, Alphazard, basically called out the entire premise. Their argument is pretty compelling. They're saying, look, the whole promise of AI was that it could understand natural language, right? So why are we creating these rigid, formatted instruction files? Isn't that just going backwards? If AI is so smart, shouldn't it be able to read the same documentation humans read and figure things out? And there's this other fascinating thread where BlinkyMac12 suggests this might just be a temporary band-aid. They're arguing that we're in this awkward transition period where AI is almost good enough to understand human documentation, but not quite there yet. So maybe agents.md is just scaffolding we'll tear down in a year or two when the models get better. The technical implementation details are actually pretty interesting too. The format includes specific sections for development environment tips, testing instructions. They're even showing examples with modern tooling like PNPM, Turbo, and Vite. It's very much designed for the contemporary JavaScript ecosystem, which, that's where a lot of AI-assisted coding is happening right now, so it makes sense. But here's what really caught my attention. The discussion revealed that we're already seeing fragmentation. Some people are using Claude.md for Anthropic's Claude, others are using LLMS.txt, and various tools have their own specific formats. So we might be watching the birth of yet another standard in a field that's already getting crowded with competing standards. You know that XKCD comic about how standards proliferate? Yeah, we might be living through that in real time. The separation of concerns argument is particularly thought-provoking, though. The idea that human documentation and machine documentation might need to be fundamentally different, that's actually a pretty big philosophical shift in how we think about code documentation. For decades, we've been trying to write documentation that serves everyone: junior developers, senior developers, project managers, stakeholders. Now we're saying AI agents are different enough that they need their own parallel documentation system. Some developers in the thread are already going all in, sharing their implementations and discussing best practices. Others are warning that this could lead to documentation drift. You update your README, but forget to update AGENTS.md, and suddenly your AI assistant is working with outdated information. It's the classic two sources of truth problem that, honestly, we should have seen coming. What I find most intriguing is that this might be one of the first times we're explicitly acknowledging that AI consumers of information have different needs than human consumers. That's actually a pretty big deal when you think about it. We're essentially creating a new layer of infrastructure specifically for machine consumption, which could be the beginning of a much larger trend in how we structure information in an AI-augmented world. Speaking of AI systems and trust issues, our next story takes a much darker turn. It's about what happens when AI features break critical infrastructure and nobody's talking about it. Now we have Copilot broke audit logs, but Microsoft won't tell customers, which generated 765 points and 281 comments on Hacker News. Unfortunately, I couldn't generate a proper summary for this story. And this Microsoft story really feeds into a broader theme we're seeing across the tech industry. Developers are getting increasingly frustrated with cloud-dependent tools that compromise on privacy and control, which brings us to our next story. Now we have Zedless. Zfork focused on privacy and being local first, which generated 411 points and 242 comments on Hacker News. Unfortunately, I couldn't generate a proper summary for this story. All right, let's shift gears completely and talk about something that's just pure, delightful, curiosity-driven development. All right, so here's something that really caught my eye on Hacker News today. Show HN. I was curious about spherical helix, ended up making this visualization. And you know what? This is exactly the kind of story that reminds me why I love the tech community so much. So this developer wakes up one morning with this random thought bouncing around in their head about spherical helixes. Now, I'll be honest, I wasn't lying awake at night wondering about spherical helix paths, and the developer actually jokes about this too, saying probably not when asking readers if they've ever wondered about them. But here's the thing. They took that weird little morning thought and turned it into this incredible educational tool that's now helping hundreds of people understand 3D mathematics. What they built is this interactive web visualization that starts super simple. You begin with just a dot moving along one axis using a cosine function, basic trigonometry stuff. Then it layers on complexity. You add another axis, suddenly you've got a circle. Add a third dimension, boom, you're looking at a helix. And by the end, you're watching these absolutely mesmerizing, chaotic patterns that emerge from combining just a few mathematical functions. It's like watching complexity emerge from simplicity right before your eyes. The way they structured it is really clever too. Instead of throwing you into the deep end with complex math, it's this tap to progress narrative. Each click reveals another layer of understanding. It's almost like those old Flash animations where you'd click through a story, except here, you're learning about 3D coordinate systems and parametric equations without even realizing it. Now, the Hacker News discussion got pretty interesting. You've got people jumping in with historical context. Turns out spherical helixes have this whole connection to navigation and map making. Someone brought up rhomblines, which are these constant bearing paths that sailors used to use, and how they appear as spirals on a sphere, but straight lines on Mercator projections. I mean, that's the kind of rabbit hole I could spend hours going down. But not everyone was completely sold on the execution. There were some valid critiques about the pedagogical approach. A few commenters felt like it made too big a leap from here's a simple circle to here's this wild, chaotic pattern without enough explanation in between. And honestly, they might have a point. When you're deep in the weeds of something you're building, it's easy to forget what seems obvious to you might not be to someone encountering it for the first time. There was also this fascinating debate about what chaos actually means in mathematics. The developer uses the word to describe these complex patterns, but one commenter pushed back, saying they're conflating chaotic behavior, which is actually deterministic but sensitive to initial conditions, with randomness. It's one of those classic internet moments where a simple visualization project spawns a deeper discussion about mathematical terminology and concepts. On the technical side, well, let's just say not everyone had a smooth experience. Some people reported performance issues, especially on older machines or mobile devices. The background dither effect, which I'm guessing was meant to add some visual flair, apparently drove a few people up the wall. One person called it unbearable, which, ouch, but also, that's the kind of direct feedback that makes projects better. What really strikes me about this whole thing is how it exemplifies something I see all the time in the developer community. Someone has a random curiosity, they build something to explore it, and suddenly they've created value for hundreds or thousands of other people. The post got over 650 points and more than 100 comments, all from someone just following their curiosity about how objects move through 3D space. And you know what one commenter said that really resonated? They pointed out that while this shows you how functions create shapes, what many people actually need is the reverse. I want this specific shape, what functions do I use? It's a totally different problem, but it highlights how even a well-executed project can reveal adjacent problems worth solving. This is the kind of project that makes me want to dust off my old graphics programming books and start playing around with WebGL again. There's something deeply satisfying about taking abstract mathematical concepts and making them tangible, interactive, something you can see and manipulate. But, speaking of websites doing unexpected things in your browser, our final story today is going to make you look at web security in a whole new light. All right. So here's something that'll make you do a double take. Why does the US Visa application website do a port scan of my network? That's the question someone posed on Hacker News, and wow, did this one blow up with nearly 500 points and over 200 comments. You know what's wild? When you're applying for a US Visa online, the website is apparently scanning your local network ports. Yeah, you heard that right. A government website is poking around your computer, looking for specific services running on localhost. And before you think this is some conspiracy theory, it's not. The community actually figured out exactly what's happening here. So it turns out this is F5's anti-bot protection doing its thing. F5 is this massive security company that provides services to tons of major websites, and they've built this into their fraud detection system. What they're specifically doing is hitting up ports like 127.0.0.1:8888, looking for tools that security researchers and, let's be honest, potential bad actors might be running. They're hunting for things like Burp Suite, which is this popular tool for analyzing web traffic. Basically, the kind of thing you'd use if you were trying to reverse engineer or automate interactions with a website. But here's where it gets really interesting. This isn't just the US Visa site doing this. Community members pointed out that eBay does it, Facebook does it. It's become this widespread practice across the internet as part of device fingerprinting. They're essentially building a profile of your machine to figure out if you're a real person or some automated system trying to game their platform. Now, the technical folks in the comments are having a field day with this. Some are genuinely concerned about the security implications. I mean, why can a website just scan your local network without asking permission? One commenter made this brilliant point. We make websites ask for microphone access, camera access, location access, but scanning your local ports? Apparently, that's just fine. It does feel like a bit of a blind spot in browser security, doesn't it? There's this fascinating debate happening about whether browsers should even allow this behavior. Some folks are suggesting that browsers should block these localhost requests by default, maybe require explicit permission like they do for other sensitive operations. But then others are pointing out legitimate use cases, like what if a government site needs to connect to a local smart card reader for ID verification? That's actually a thing in some EU countries. The defensive measures people are suggesting are pretty clever too. Some users are talking about running browser extensions that block these requests. Others are suggesting firewall rules. There's even discussion about whether running everything through a VPN or proxy would help. Though, ironically, using those tools might actually make you look more suspicious to these anti-bot systems. It's like this weird arms race between privacy-conscious users and anti-bot systems. What really strikes me about this whole situation is the transparency issue. Nobody's telling users this is happening. You're just trying to apply for a visa, and meanwhile, the website is interrogating your computer about what software you're running. Even if it's for legitimate anti-fraud purposes, shouldn't there be some disclosure, some kind of notice that says, hey, we're going to scan your local ports to verify you're not a bot? And you know what's kind of funny? One skeptical commenter asked for actual evidence this was happening, wondering if people were just seeing false positives in their network monitors. But then multiple people confirmed it with packet captures and specific technical details about the F5 implementation. The internet sleuths really came through on this one. The bigger picture here is about the evolving nature of web security and privacy. We're in this strange place where websites need increasingly sophisticated methods to detect bots and fraud, but those methods are getting more and more invasive. Port scanning used to be something only hackers did. Now it's just another Tuesday on the visa application website. Makes you wonder what other security measures are happening behind the scenes that we don't even know about yet. And that wraps up our top 5 stories from yesterday's Hacker News. From the philosophical questions about whether AI needs its own documentation standards to the very real privacy concerns of websites scanning our local networks, it's clear we're living through some fascinating times in tech. What really struck me about yesterday's discussions was this recurring theme of trust and transparency. Whether it's Microsoft not disclosing issues with Copilot, websites secretly scanning your ports, or developers forking projects to regain control over their tools, there's this underlying tension between what technology companies are doing and what users actually want. But you know what gives me hope? That spherical helix visualization. Just someone following their curiosity, building something beautiful and sharing it with the world. That's the spirit of hacking in its purest form, and it's alive and well on Hacker News. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If any of these stories sparked your curiosity, head over to Hacker News and join the conversation. The beauty of this community is that whether you're debating documentation standards or discovering your browser is being port scanned, there's always someone ready to dive deep into the technical details with you. Until tomorrow, keep questioning, keep building, and keep that healthy skepticism about what your software is doing behind the scenes. This has been your Hacker News Daily, and I'll see you in the next one.